Welcome to Reverse Reset Restore, the podcast for sharing experiences, ideas, concepts, and strategies that can help us in our personal journeys of healing. My name is Sally, and I'm reversing my physical health conditions, resetting my mind, thoughts, and beliefs, and restoring my relationship with myself. Change comes from within. Stopping by. In my first podcast, I shared a little bit of my story, how a near-death encounter has taken me on a journey to challenge and change my life from the inside out. This podcast came into existence in my imagination a number of years ago, but I put it aside because I didn't feel quite frankly, had my shit together enough to start it. How could I sit here and talk about the lessons I'd learned or the discoveries about myself that I'd made when I hadn't perfected them? Of course, this line of thinking is a perfect example of how we keep ourselves small, of how we choose to focus on the fear and its driving excuses for why we should give up before we even begin. And so for years I have sat on this idea, returning to it every once in a while, and then finding another reason why I couldn't start it. I think it's a common carousel we can all find ourselves on, and the world has kind of set it up this way. The influencers and Instagrammers, the A to D list celebrities, fashion magazines, and the hundreds of millions of dollars that is the diet industry and the makeup industry, all of these things telling us how we should look and feel and be. And then comes the crippling shame and the feeling that you are the only person on the planet that cannot get it together. So we believe the lies we see, hear, and tell ourselves. And in some way, those lies bring us a sense of comfort and relief. I can't fail if I don't try. I can't prove the belief system I'm subscribing to is correct if I don't put myself out there. Or maybe you have put yourself out there and your belief system has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I am who I think I am. We are the choices we make. We can choose to continue on making the choices that hurt us, or we can work towards choosing the choices that heal us. Through the life of this podcast, I want to give you opportunity to consider how you can reshape your life. So many of us are carrying around a lifetime of physical, mental, and emotional pain, and it has overburdened us psychologically as well as physically. Maybe you have been hurt by those who were supposed to love and protect you. Maybe it feels like life has dealt you a bad hand. Maybe you've buried your hurts so deep and they've come out anyway, in the form of obesity, illness, bitterness, broken relationships, addictions, anger, anxiety disorders. This journey we're about to take is not going to necessarily be easy. I've been finding as I work through some of my deep-seated trauma that it brings a lot of stuff up. Stuff that is really painful and hard, and stuff that has elevated my fear. But as I do this work, I know I am releasing myself from some of the burdens I have been carrying around almost all of my life. And I simply don't want to do that anymore. If you're here listening, perhaps you don't want to do that anymore either. But maybe you don't really know where to start. Well, like most things, starting begins with one solitary step, and it's a choice. You'll discover I'll talk a lot about choices because that is the one sure thing we have. It is the power we each have at our disposal every single day. Thousands of choices are made by us unconsciously and consciously. But we've found ways to abdicate our responsibility of those various choices, often blaming others' actions and their behaviours for our suffering. And I get it. Many of the circumstances we may have found ourselves in were not necessarily our doing. This is especially true as children, when we couldn't perhaps protect ourselves, and we learned that people don't always have our best interests at heart. As children, we didn't have the autonomy that we do as adults. But we are not children anymore. And isn't it time that we released ourselves from the chains of our childhood and walked in a freedom we always should have had? Does this sound impossible to you? A pipe dream? Perhaps the very idea of forgiving the past and choosing a new way of thinking and believing and being frightens you, or is making you feel uncomfortable or angry. That's okay. If you're feeling any of those feelings, it's completely normal. You've learned a way to default in the world to deal with feelings that make you feel unsafe. For some of us, that default is anger. For others, it is closing ourselves off, shutting down, or building a wall to block out the rest of the world. I know for myself, I built a wall of fat, layered it over years as a source of protection. As a survivor of childhood abuse, multiple sexual assaults as a teenager and a woman, I know that my body became something I both despised and reviled. Subconsciously, I made sure I was safe by making myself fat and thus no longer an object of desire. Our subconscious does not operate on logic at any level. So logically, I know that my being overweight does not protect me from unwanted sexual advances or assault, but my subconscious absolutely believed it did. And now, well, I'm ready to do something about it. Many times I've invested time into digging down deep under the surface and rediscovering all the pain and trauma I buried there. Each time I've done this has been an experiment in self-understanding and breaking patterns and beliefs that no longer serve me. And if I'm going to be honest with you, it's been a little bit like taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Reversing some of my old ways of thinking has been a lesson in resilience and in letting go. And letting go is definitely a process, at least for me. It's been something I have to practice time and time again. And while some things have permanently changed, I have often regressed back into those old, painful habits. That kind of comfortable sustainability, right? An example. Up until about a year ago, the way I spoke about myself internally was always derogatory, was always in a language I would never speak to anyone else with. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you know exactly what it's like to berate yourself over and over. The thing with this internal type of self-talk is that it comes totally from a place of pain and fear and a belief of not being good enough. As a child, I actually had a really good relationship with myself. That wasn't something that was taught to me necessarily. It was just this innate, authentic me, the self-love. And then things began to happen to and around me. Well-meaning people would make comments about my aspirations. There would be unwelcome and unprompted comparisons about my body to other girls. And without me even realizing it, I took on board all of these judgments and critiques about myself and my dreams, and somewhere along the line began to view myself as less than. I can't pinpoint when it happened exactly, but that authentic me got squashed. Now, in my 40s, I am finally understanding that I gave so much of my power away by believing these expectations and judgments and holding on to them as absolute truth. I often say that none of us come out of our childhoods unscathed, no matter how storybook perfect they may have been. It's one of the motivating factors for me in the work I do with young people. I'm hoping to teach them to see their own amazingness and shed the weight of what words have been spoken off of their lives far earlier than it's taken me to do for myself. Throughout this podcast, we're going to work together to change things. If you've been suffering in physical pain and discomfort, battling in the area of weight, going head to heels with diets, feeling like you are failing over and over again and hating this body you find yourself in, I want you to know I've been right there with you. I know the frustration, the pain, the utter despair of loathing my brokenness and rejecting my body rather than being able to love and celebrate its magnificence. Perhaps you've been struggling with a mindset of lack or a belief system that nothing ever works out for you, which means that nothing ever does because you believe it. Maybe you've got yourself into a habit of blaming everyone else for the misfortunes in your life, so that nothing in your life and all of its wrongness is your responsibility. Or you've let the past remain in your present so that you can't fully be here now. Prime examples of this are when we are full of worry and anxiety, something so prevalent in the majority of people I know, something that has been prevalent in me and maybe still running inside of you. The good news is you're not utterly and irrevocably broken. You can free yourself from the agony of anxiety and reverse many of the physical conditions you may be experiencing. Together, we are going to reset the way we see ourselves and break free from the constraints we have bound ourselves to and create new ways of embracing both our body and our mind and our emotions. Together, we can restore the image of who we are to begin to live a life filled with a deeper understanding of our own uniqueness and find in that truth our joy and purpose. All it takes is the willingness to choose a different way of existing. I am so looking forward to hearing and sharing the stories and experiences of those walking alongside me, searching and finding themselves in a world who wants us to remain broken and blind. In upcoming episodes, we'll be talking about the various methods we've spent a lifetime employing that have kept us from the life we truly deserve to live, and how we can break those habits. You do not need to stay restricted to the ugly thoughts tumbling around in your mind. There are physical conditions that you can remove from your life. I know this because I have healed myself from daily headaches, hemiplegic migraines, IBS, and other long-term pain. I reversed my type 2 diabetes once, and I'm in the process of doing that again as I return to a place of self-love and acceptance. In our next episode, we'll be looking at the very much neglected here and now, often overlooked for the experiences of the past and the anxiety for the future. If you're ready to break free from your own self-imposed constraints, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. I'd also really love to connect with you on Facebook or Instagram. Just search for Reverse Reset Restore. Finally, our quote to take us to the end of the podcast this week is from Nelson Mandela, a man who spent decades in a prison and still filled nations with hope. He could have come out of that prison and his physical circumstances bitter, angry, and fearful. Instead, he chose to focus on making choices that changed the course of history for the better. May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears.